You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello and welcome to another wonderful show. Today on Business Wealth Impact, we have Terry Tucker, who is a speaker, author, and international podcast guest on the topics of motivation, mindset, and self-development. Among his diverse professional roles, Terry has been a marketing executive, a hospital administrator, a SWAT hostage negotiator, and for the past 12 years, a cancer warrior. Welcome, Terry.
John, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Absolutely. So you're an unusual guest because we were chatting a little bit before and you were telling me, I said, what's your main occupation? And what did you tell me?
I said, my main occupation is to put as much positivity, motivation, love back into the world with whatever time I have left on the face of this earth.
Right. And you also said your main occupation was staying alive.
Yeah, that's... it certainly is staying alive. I sound like a Bee Gees song, but yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, I'm fascinated because, this is such a transparent conversation about somebody who has like a lot of cancer right now, right? And different types of cancer.
One type. I have a very rare form of melanoma, and most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun, affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's a very rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands.
Okay. My sister actually died from your form of cancer. You did not know that, but I thought it was melanoma or something. But it travels through the body and creates cysts as it goes. Then you have to get rid of those. Then it creates new ones. Is that what you have?
Mine has, I have tumors in my lungs now. I had tumors in my groin. Mine appeared on the bottom of my foot. Right. I mean, basically what my oncologist told me was wherever your cancer is in your body, it's always been there. It's been there since you were diagnosed. The problem with imaging, CAT scans, MRIs, and things like that, is they can only pick up tumors the size of a garden pea.
Yes.
So you have to have, that's a relatively large tumor. That's about 1 billion cells for a tumor that size. But if it's smaller than that, they can't find it. Right. And so my lung tumors were not picked up for almost 8 years because they hadn't grown big enough to be seen.
Right. Well, I'm fascinated right now. I had no idea until you said that the exact same cancer my sister passed away from 3 years ago. Okay. So this is kind of incredible. Okay. I'm not happy about that, but I'm actually amazed that you just said that. Okay. So I get the deal. Now, you were saying that you spend most of your time in hospital. Can you explain what you're doing in hospital and how that plays out?
Sure. So in 2020, right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I found out that my entire lower leg was full of cancer and I was going to need to have that amputated above the knee, which I did. And I also found out I have tumors in my lungs. And so I am on, I was on chemotherapy for a while, but right now I'm on a clinical trial drug, meaning it's not available to the public. It's still in trial to see if it works, see if the efficacy is there. And what this drug does is the way cancer proliferates in the body is it secretes a protein or an enzyme that hides itself from your own immune system. This drug that I'm on goes in and wipes out that protein or enzyme, allowing my own immune system, just like if you get a cold or a flu virus, to say, hey, this doesn't belong here. We need to attack it. And so my own immune system has been keeping me alive with these tumors in my lungs. They're still there, but they're, as my doctor says, stable. They're not growing and they haven't gone anywhere else. And that's been for 3 years now.
Amazing. So not on chemo, but doing this. And you were saying it's such a heavy regime. You said most people won't do that. Okay, now that's what fascinated me because most people wouldn't do that because they don't want to live enough to do that. So their motivation to do that isn't large enough. Okay, and then we were chatting. You said, and I agree with you, you can have all the motivation in the world, but if you don't have discipline and grit, it doesn't matter, right? So you speak a lot on mindset. Why don't you just share a little bit with us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot about motivation. I even named my company Motivational Check. But motivation's not enough. I mean, motivation is internal. It comes from you. Nobody's going to motivate you to do something. You have to decide you want to do it. But it's not enough. And the way I look at it is kind of a three-legged stool. You need motivation, discipline, and good
Mm,
habits. And if you don't have any one of those three, it would be like cutting the legs off one of those arms on the stool. You would be off balance.
mm,
If you have motivation and discipline but terrible habits, you're probably never going to be successful.
hmm
If you have motivation and great habits but not the discipline to implement them, again, very hard to be successful, however you define that word in your life. So I think you need all
mm,
three. And discipline, again, that comes from you. Nobody's going to wake you up at 6 a.m. and say, okay, hey, go for a run or journal or meditate
hmm
or whatever. You've got to decide that. And, going along with what you just said about how, what we were talking about people not wanting to do the regimen I'm on, I heard a study recently that said 33% of Americans, so a third of the country, admits to hitting the snooze button on their alarm at least 3 times every morning.
mm,
So that's 45 minutes that you could have used to better
mm,
yourself, to work out, to meditate, to journal, whatever it is that works for you. Third of Americans fall into that category.
mm. Now, maybe some of those Americans didn't get enough sleep, and the extra 15 minutes helps them be more refreshed.
And from everything I've read about sleep, and sleep is incredibly important to me
Yes.
because there are a lot of times when I don't feel that good, when I don't get good
hmm
sleep, just to clean out the bad chemicals that are produced in the brain during your daily
Yes.
routines. So that when you go to sleep, those chemicals are cleaned out,
Yes.
are gotten rid of. And if you don't get enough sleep, they're not
Right.
cleaned out. So you're kind of walking around in that fog
hmm
of, I just don't feel good. I'm lethargic. So sleep is incredibly important
hmm
to people. And I've also read that that extra 15 minutes of hitting your snooze button actually really does you no
Right.
good. It actually does you more
Right.
harm than it actually does good.
Right. Because it's just this half place. Yes. And
Yeah.
also, psychologically, it doesn't do us good because we're feeling like, well, I should really get up. Right. Yeah. Okay.
That's
So
right.
you're somebody that is highly motivated to live because what you told me you're going through, and the reaction, and it's you said 1 week and it's off, and then 1 week.
1 week at the hospital, I go every day. I'm there for about 6 or 7 hours. Then I go home, come back the next day, and I do that all week. And then I get 2 weeks off to recover.
hmm
And it beats me up. I mean, I'm physically beaten up. It lowers my blood counts and things like that. And my wife and I will occasionally have a disagreement about, hey, you need to rest. And my comment is,
hmm
I'll get plenty of rest when I'm dead. Doing
Right.
things like this with you and writing and things,
hmm
those energize me. Those give me
hmm
purpose and they give me more energy. They don't make me feel bad at all.
Right. Because your will to keep doing all that, right? Because you seem, as I said, you seem extremely happy. And a lot of people that have had their leg cut off and are spending most of their time, well, 1 week full time every third week. Most people will be complaining about that and saying, I really hate my life. So it really is about how you're seeing things as well, how you're visualizing or viewing what is going on in your life really matters because, the power of positive thinking, right? And looking at it a certain way. Okay, so you wrote a book. I'd like you to tell everybody the title of your book.
The book is called Sustainable Excellence 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life.
Okay, tell us more or less I have not read your book. Tell me what this book talks about and why is it important for people to read it?
Yeah, I never wanted to write a book, never expected to write a book. It wasn't something I set out to do. There's sort of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer.
hmm
When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God never talked to me and said, hey, Terry, you should write a book. But I think what God did was put enough people in my path that started making the same suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured I better pay attention to that. So Sustainable Excellence is really a book born out of 2 conversations I had. One of the other jobs I've had in my life is I was a girls' high school basketball coach when we lived in Texas.
Mm,
And I had one of my former players move with her fiance to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live. And the 4 of us had dinner one night.
mm,
And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her
hmm
purpose. She got real quiet for a while. And she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about.
Mm.
Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth. And there is a reason,
Mm-hmm.
using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason.
Right.
So that was one story. And then I had a young man in college who reached out to me on social media and he said, what do you think are the most important things that I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life?
Mm.
And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help out. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we
Right.
all know. So I spent some time taking some notes and eventually came up with these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle.
Mm-hmm.
Or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 4 or 5 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's fascinating. Now, you've had so many jobs, a hostage negotiator for the police in Cincinnati. How did you just get bored with what you were doing and kept switching? Because most people don't do such a variety in their life.
No, I really didn't get bored. It was when I graduated from college, my father and my grandmother were both dying of different forms of cancers.
Oh.
And so I ended up living at home for 3.5 years, helping my mom care for them. I wanted to be in law enforcement. My grandfather had been a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. In 1933, he was shot in the line of duty. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered that knock on the door, or the stories my grandmother told about that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in going to law enforcement, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to live. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to live. So when I graduated, I had a choice. I could have said, hey, Dad, I know you're dying, but sorry, I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So my first 2 jobs were in business because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away and I followed my own dreams. And that's one of the things in my life that I am incredibly proud of myself for, that I never let my dream die. I never let my purpose die. I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by most accounts is pretty old to be getting into that line of work.
And then how did you get into the whole hostage negotiation part?
So there was an opening. And for those of your audience who don't understand how SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics teams, are configured, there's usually a tactical group. Those are the men and women with all the toys. And then there's a hostage negotiating group. And we used to always joke with the tactical team that if we did our job correctly, you didn't get to use all your toys and things like that. So there was an opening as a negotiator, and there was a physical fitness requirement. You had to run 1.5 miles, do push-ups and sit-ups. You had to meet with the psychologist, the police psychologist. You had to take psychological exams. You had to meet with the command staff. And then you had to meet with the team. And it was an all or nothing. If one person on the team said, I've worked with Terry before, he's difficult to work with, I don't think he should be on the team, you didn't make it. And so I was lucky enough or fortunate enough to have dealt with or worked with a lot of the members of the team and got onto the team. And it was a 4.5 year, it was exciting. It was scary. It was knowledge gaining. I mean, it was something I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to do.
That would have made you a very good listener and communicator, better than you were before, I'm guessing.
It would, because I remember when I first started, they gave us a formula of how we as human beings communicate with each other, not police officers or anything like that. And the formula was 7, 38, 55. And 7% of how we communicate a message with somebody else are the words that we use. And think how many times we're like, oh, I wish I hadn't have said that, or I wish I would have said something different. That's only 7% of how we communicate a message. 38% is the tone of voice that we use with those words. And then 55%, so more than half, of how we communicate a message is our body language and our facial expressions.
Mm-hmm.
So think about that formula now as hostage negotiators. If somebody had barricaded themselves in a room with a gun, I was not in the room with that person. Many times I was blocks away talking to them on the phone. So I did not have the luxury of that 55%. I didn't have the luxury of saying something to you and seeing you kind of roll your eyes like, oh, I can't believe he asked me that. So you're right. We had to get good at based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying.
That's fascinating. Okay, so now this may sound like a strange question, but what is your goal for life? What is your goal? You know that there's a lot of people that are working really hard to lengthen the longevity of human life, right? So their goals are, I want to live to 120. I'm hearing this a lot in this group I'm in. What's your goal for life?
To connect. And I think, and I say that, and let me kind of give you the backstory on that. One of the nurses that cares for me at the hospital is a former hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't understand hospice care, those are people who take care of others at the end of their life. And she recommended a book to me. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And in that book, it describes people who had near-death experiences. And I've never had a near-death experience, so I can't relate. But one of the most interesting thing to me in that book was, regardless of who the person having the near-death experience saw during that experience, whether it was God or Jesus or an angel or a saint or a friend or a relative, almost everybody got asked one question: how do you treat my people? So and I am Christian, and I know there's all kinds of different religions out there, but if you go back in the Bible and, people ask Jesus, what's the most important commandment? Have no other gods but me, love your God with all your heart, mind, your soul. And the second is just like, love your neighbor as yourself. That question to me was, how do we treat each other? How do we connect with each other? I mean, 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember you and I were here, but maybe the connections that we make with other people, the relationships that we form with other people, those things are incredibly important. And I guess I want to spend the rest of my life developing as many of those connections as I possibly can.
That's beautiful. Okay, now my next question, which was, I love your answer. Now I'm going to repeat, actually what I really meant. How long do you want to live?
I don't even think about that. I mean, you and I were talking before that in 2012, when I was diagnosed, I was told, you'll probably be dead in 2 years. And I thought, well, you've given me a death sentence. Maybe I can turn that death sentence into a life sentence. So I don't really spend a lot of time. When I had my leg amputated and I found out I had these tumors in my lungs, I went with my wife to the mortuary and the cemetery and the church, and I planned my funeral.
Wow.
And because I come on podcasts like yours and I speak in person to groups and talk about motivation and the need to keep moving forward, it was interesting because I got a decent amount of brushback from people who commented that planning my funeral was in some way defeatist. And I had to remind these folks that the last time I checked, we're all going to die. As far as I know, nobody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is going to truly live. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. However long that is, that's great. I have no control over when I die, but I do have control of how I live.
For sure, but you have some mission, so it sounds like you don't want to go quite yet.
I'd love to go. I mean, we kind of look at ourselves like, we're bodies with spirits. I kind of look at us like we're spirits with bodies. I'd love to go to God. I'd love to go back home. But don't get me wrong. I'm not going to do anything to hasten that in any way. But I also, again, something I'll never forget. My doctor showed me my CAT scan about 6 months after I had my leg amputated. And I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan. But you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, well, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces. I was coughing up green bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And I will never forget this. He put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know because you shouldn't have been.
Mm-hmm.
Which said to me, God's not done with
Not
me.
logical.
When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade.
100%. Now, what is the one thing, like you talk a lot and you help people, what's the one message or mindset shift or thing that you impart to people that you feel helps the most, that you want to really have people absorb and listen and do? What is that one? If you could say it's one thing, what is that?
So Ernest Hemingway was one of our most famous writers, and he wrote a book called Farewell to Arms. And there is a line in that book. And I try to tell this to people all the time. And the line is this: life breaks everyone. And afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. I want people to understand that life's going to break you. You're going to lose somebody who's close to you. You know, you're unexpectedly going to get let go from your job. You're going to find out that you have a chronic or a terminal illness. Life is going to beat you to your knees. Can you, like when you break your arm and they put it in a cast, when that arm heals, when that bone heals, it is stronger at the broken places. Can you use that adversity to make you a stronger and better human being? You can. I know you can, because you're looking at somebody who's done it. And I am the biggest wimp in the world. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. But can you use that adversity to make you a stronger and better human being?
It's very much about the what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which they thought was Camus or Camus, but it was actually Goethe that said that. I don't know if you know that, but it's true.
I did not.
It is true that if you're pushing yourself towards the adversity and then you survive, well, you've learned how to survive under duress. So then it is more strength.
You do. You learn to, instead of run from pain, to embrace pain, to embrace difficulty, to embrace adversity, to basically throw it inside of you, to burn it as fuel, to use it as energy, to make you stronger and more resilient. I mean, we're just hardwired to avoid pain. We don't like it. You know, our brain tells us, stop, get away from it. But if you can use it, it's amazing how much stronger you can become.
I agree. And also then you can have the delight of contrast bias, because, you know, a lot of people that are given stuff, they don't appreciate it. But when you've had to go through a lot and a lot of loss, and then you finally get something, it's like, wow, I really appreciate this, because there was a journey towards getting it. Because human beings who don't make any effort to get stuff, they don't appreciate it at all.
Yeah, I mean, small minds and weak people kill big dreams. I think most people never, ever contemplate what it means to be great in their lives. You know, they always say that the richest real estate in the world are cemeteries, because they're filled with dreams never realized, books never written, relationships never pursued. Don't be one of those people. Get out there and make life happen for you.
Right. What a great message. Just do it. I think that was a marketing message for.
That was a commercial.
Gee, I wonder what those were. Well, you're super inspiring, Terry. So you're welcome. So what's the next move for you? What, you have some projects? What's next for you?
So I'm writing another book. Sustainable Excellence was a book about success, or how I thought people could be successful. I'm writing another book now that also is about a word that starts with the letter S, and that's significance. You know, success is what we do for ourselves. Significance is what we do for other people. And don't get me wrong, I think you can be both. You can be successful and significant in life. But I'm working on that second book. I'm working with a couple of doctors to produce a webinar about how we can marry traditional Western medicine with some maybe alternative medicine types, and help people along that regard as well. I mean, I've used traditional medicine. I've also used alternative medicine. And, you know, I've always said, I want my life to be shaped by the decisions that I made, not by the ones that I didn't or somebody else made for me.
Fabulous. Now, do you have any children?
I do. I have one daughter.
So you didn't get the 2.5, you got the 1. And how is your family coping with all of your illness and everything? Are they handling it well?
I mean, my daughter's married. She's in the military now. Yes. I mean, I always say, you know, what's gotten me through this are my 3 F's: faith, family, and friends. And I remember when I had my leg amputated, my doctor initially wanted to start me on chemotherapy. And I was
Mm.
8 years into this fight. And I looked at him and said, is it going to save my life? And he said, nah, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I looked at him and I said, well, if the outcome is going to be the same, I'm going to die. I would prefer not to die sick and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but I'll go home and I'll talk to my family. And this really did happen. This is a true story. It's kind of funny. And so I go home and start talking to my wife and daughter about it. And my daughter's immediately, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's three of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, you know? So we sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about me having chemotherapy. And then
Mhm.
when that's done, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raise their hand. I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do?
Right.
But I remembered when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the
Mhm.
people we love the most to class. And as we
Mhm.
were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to,
Mhm.
but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug that I'm on now.
Oh, well, that's so providential. I also know that family members who are maybe more like natural minded, as soon as a family member has cancer, it's like, please just zap them. They just are desperate and it's human nature. Please, doctor, do whatever you can. We don't care about reactions. We just want this person to live. So that's love. They just wanted to know that you're going to be here.
And we've talked about it. We've talked about death. We've talked about, I mean, I've studied, I've read about the old Stoic philosophers, you know, Socrates, Marcus Aurelius, people like that.
Mm.
And they used to talk about the Latin phrase memento mori, meaning
Mm.
remember you're going to die. I mean,
Right.
we're so afraid about death in this country. It's like death gives life purpose. If we didn't die, we just sit around and procrastinate all day. I'll do it tomorrow. I mean, I'm going to be here
Exactly.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
actually, it's so funny, foreign countries and how they view death is very, very different from the New World, from Australia, America. Also, in Mexico, they're parading, with the skulls.
yeah.
We think that's macabre. They're like, oh yeah, well, there's a skull falling around. Let's pick it up again. And I found that like, wow, okay. But there was a famous French film director, and I forget his name, but he said he was being interviewed and he said, oh, I think about death every day. And they said, well, that's pretty macabre. He goes, no, how can you think about life without thinking about death every day? They're together. And they were like, wow. He said, oh, absolutely. Every single day. Of course I think about death. Don't you? And they're like, well, maybe not every. He goes, oh, that's extraordinary. He just said, of course, of course I am. It's life, death together. It's all. Now, do you know this book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello? And the peril is called Awareness, the perils and opportunity of reality, I think it's called. Okay. And in the book, he was a Indian Catholic priest. In the
Mhm.
book, he wrote that we all should be imagining ourselves every day in a coffin turning to dust. And people were like, oh, I can't do that. We are all going to be in a coffin or it's reality. And people are like, but did he say, but it's actually what you just said. It is reality. But somehow we want to pretend that's not in the cards for us. But we don't know anybody that's survived death ever, forever. So
Right.
it's kind of the same thing. And he said he always got such a bad reaction when he said, yet it's true. But people don't want to think of that. And it's not to think about the negative. It's to think, well, how do I want to live every day to make the most of it? And if you're
Or that
religious,
I'm not living every day. That's why I don't
right,
want to think about death because I know I'm not living my true life. I'm not being true to
right,
myself. And you're right. I mean, if you're being true to yourself, death is not nearly as scary as those people who are just kind of muddling through life. And then,
right,
and I've seen that. I've seen people that live their purpose die peacefully. And I've
right.
also seen people that haven't lived their purpose that go kicking and screaming. I want another week, another month, another year.
Mm,
Sorry, it doesn't work that
mm,
way. You got
yeah,
the time you needed. You just didn't do anything.
right. Or what you wanted to achieve. Well, Terry, this has been very interesting, and I really want to thank you for your time and your energy and you coming onto the show. It's been very inspiring. Is there anything you want to leave with before we close the show for today?
I guess let me leave you with one more story, if I may. I had one of the nurses that takes care of me. All my stories are like sports and nurses. Sorry, that's all I got. But she asked me, she said, what was it like to have your foot amputated and your leg amputated? And I told her it hasn't been easy. I am 6'8" tall. So learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You get hurt from this height. But what I told her was cancer can take all my physical faculties. But cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Jean. That's who everybody who's listening to us really is. And we spend a tremendous amount of time on this body. We get enough rest, we eat right, we reduce stress, we do all these things. And I'm certainly not telling you not to do that. You absolutely should do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day, spend a little more time working on who you really are, your heart, your mind, and your soul. As we've just discussed, we know this body's going to die, it's going to decay, and it's going to go away. But our heart, our minds, and our souls, those things are eternal. Those things live on. And I just don't think we spend nearly as much time working on them as we should.
I could not agree more. So inspiring. Terry, thank you again. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And if you want to get in touch with Terry, we'll have a link to his website. And if you're enjoying these shows, please do subscribe, please share and tell your friends about it. And I will see you on the next episode. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jean Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jean Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.